Hey, partners in crime, it's great to see you again this week. I am delighted to say that we have with us today Mitchell Karnes. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, just to let you know, if you haven't heard, Mitchell is a husband, father of seven, and grandfather of 10 at the moment.
Yes, at the moment.
He uses his experience and insights as a minister, counselor, and educator to write and speak on challenging issues and concerns with an ever growing audience. He's published six novels, three short stories, a one act play, and numerous Bible study lessons. So I am excited to welcome him today with his new book, Watergrave. So, welcome. Let's get started.
All right.
So tell us a little bit about Watergrave.
Oh, wow. Well, the inspiration for this, I was a bivocational pastor at the time. I had been a full-time pastor, but I was working back in the school system, and so the time was walking through the sanctuary and just had those moments where those stories just kind of pop in your head, looking back at the baptistry, and all of a sudden, an image of a pastor being found dead at the bottom of the baptistry pops in my mind of all things. And so I just started growing the mystery of who could have done that and why would they have staged it the way they did. And so Watergrave has a few threads running through it. The first is obviously the mystery,
Mhm.
where the freshly homicide detective, Nashville homicide detective, Abbey Rhodes, has a backstory where there's a negative attitude towards the church, towards God, towards church people. And so her first big case just happens to be investigating in a church. And so you have that tension with her and her skepticism towards church people as she
Yeah.
tries to investigate this murder scene.
Wow. So as I was reviewing this, I love what you have at the top. It says, own the truth or the truth will own you.
Yes, yes.
And that's a really impactful statement.
That just kept coming to me and kept coming to me and kept coming to me through. And I don't know if you know who Francesca Battistelli is. She's a Christian singer, but she has this. I think it's just called Honesty, uh, but it's song. It just kept going on my mind too. You bring your mess and I'll bring mine, but basically you can't get past anything unless you
Yeah.
own that truth. And having been a high school English teacher with ninth graders, having seven kids, being a counselor and a pastor, that's the biggest thing to me is getting over any obstacle is owning the truth.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
if we keep denying it, we keep deflecting and doing all those other kinds of things, you'll never, never, ever get better.
So in reading the cover copy, is
Okay.
Abby living a lie?
She's hiding a big, big secret. So
Yeah.
yes, she would be. And well, the whole thing about her name, she's
Hmm.
really Hannah Leah Abelard is her real name. She got it legally changed when she turned 18. She got as far away from her home as she could get. So she was a missionary's child in Guatemala. And so she ended up enlisting in the army as a military police, kind of her search for control
Yes.
and ends up in Germany. So that's where her backstory is, and of course, some of that will piece out over the story.
And this is the first in an entire series. So how many do you have planned for this?
Ah, gosh, I could just keep going and going, but the publisher has committed to the first six because that's. I asked him. I said that's her reconciliation story arc. Uh,
Uh-huh.
it- she has such a deep embedded hatred for church people, and you kind of find that out little by little. And so each mystery, each book serves as a catalyst for the next section of her truth that she has to face and that she has to own.
Coming to terms with her past.
Right. So book two is already done. It's in his hands. It'll come out in July. Book three, I am about 10,000 words into. So every 6 months, you'll see the next book. But I already know where the first six are going.
That's an aggressive publishing schedule.
Yeah, I wanted to do it on kind of a live time frame, and so you get the dates in the book, not a year, but you get the dates, and they correspond
Mhm.
with the current time as they come out.
Wow, that's exciting. So you mentioned that Abby has a complex relationship with the church.
Mhm.
So, how much of her character is inspired by things that you have experienced as a minister and as a counselor?
Almost all of it. Having, of course, as a pastor, and then my kids, and what I have two that still have not come back to the church. And that's just basically on they saw too much of the inner workings and people what they how they treated me as a pastor and what they were fighting against and those kinds of things that they ended up blaming the church and blaming God for that. And so still trying to reconcile with them. Also have counseled many in as a pastor and going out and trying to reach out to people. That's the
Mhm.
consistent story is that somewhere along their line, somebody in the church hurt them, someone disappointed them, they've had some tragic event that the church failed them. And so it's usually just like one person or two people or maybe a handful of people that did that. But what happens is they take the whole church and blame it, and then that gets transferred over to God. And so that's been kind of my heartache is for those people to find out what that hurt was, to listen to them, because what we have to understand is that everybody in the church, we're still people. We're flawed people as long as we can. We're just forgiven. And so to try to reconcile them. And so Abby is the character that they will identify with, hopefully.
Mhm.
You have characters in her life that come into her life through each book that, win her over that next step and help her over that next hurdle.
So, while you are a Christian and this is a Christian series, it's not a preaching kind of series.
No,
like, like,
that's the funny thing is, as I was looking for publishers and I was looking,
Mhm.
for agents, I kept falling. And this is my classic thing: is I'm in that middle group,
Yeah,
and
you really kind
I'm
of,
I'm too secular for the Christian market, and I'm too Christian for the secular market.
yeah.
And when I found Mike Parker and WordCrafts,
Mhm.
he's in that same trench. He's trying to reach that group that everyone keeps forgetting. And so it's easy to go for the Christian market. It's easy to go for the non-Christian market. But what about those people who feel like they're still Christian or, have the belief in God, but they don't have a trust in the church? And that's who we're really marketing for.
And
So it's
that's
a
a
theme.
very large market.
It is. It's larger than people think. And
Yeah.
so it's a primarily female audience, which I'm reaching for,
Yes.
because through Abby, and it's been the biggest challenge, but also the biggest reward of writing from her perspective, because it's a first person narrative primarily. And
Mhm.
so for me to write in a female voice, of course, I have four daughters, married, I have so many granddaughters. And
Yeah.
so bits and pieces of Abby are from each of them and their voice.
Oh, that's amazing. Um, have you found that there are, because women and men react differently. So
Mhm.
in writing these, the reactions of Abby are going to be different than a man would have been because women like when they're hurt or
Yes.
they're in despair about, especially about a community, they tend to back away and just close themselves off to that community.
Yeah, the biggest truth I heard about that, it was when I was in counseling training, is that men are about report and women are about rapport.
Yeah.
They are about the emotional and attachment issues, where men are about the getting the job done. And so Abby is in that rapport, but she has to keep that closed down at the same time, because if she
Mhm.
lets that open up, the past comes flooding in.
Yeah.
And so she tries, that's why she goes to the military to learn things that are basic. That's why she stays as a police officer. That's why she's in homicide, because things are black and white.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and she can go there. And so when she starts to open up to her past and to the emotional side of that, that's where all these truths and these secrets come flooding up.
Yeah. Now, how hard is it melding that the Christian perspective into a mystery with the crime and the murder and the how hard is that for you?
It's hard not to. Um, and being a Christian since 7 years old, and now
Mhm.
I'm going to be 62 in February. So yeah, that's who I am.
Yes.
Most of my experience, I've had decades in the ministry, also in
Mhm.
the public school systems and private school systems, and in the counseling center. So um, it's just who I am and how I write and how I guess my worldview. And so it's hard not to do that. I didn't ever intend this to be a Christian book. I just intended it to be, the first one was set in a church, so you get her backstory. But it turns out that, the next book is called The Least of These, which is a biblical phrase. And so even though it's set in a homeless camp and in Nashville, it still surfaces those things. And so every piece I've ever written has a Christian character in it. It's not necessarily
Right.
meant to be a Christian mystery, but this one is predominantly in the church because that's where the mystery of the murder is set.
Mhm. So it typically or generally deals with Abby's disillusionment and the disillusionment of people in the church. So how do you hope this will resonate with the people who are in that struggle?
I'm hoping it will at least bring them to a conversation. At the
Mhm.
end of the book, I have points to ponder, and it's a list of
Yeah.
questions. And so
Mhm.
it's, I think it's 8 or 10 questions. I can't remember what we ended up with. But just through, as you're going through the book and as you finish it, to think back on it. How does this person affect and which person do you identify with the most in this story? Why is that? And so to bring a conversation, if not with others, with yourself. And I would love this to be, kind of designed to be a book club type thing, even a
Yeah.
Bible study later
Mhm.
on, where you know you take real life, and sometimes I think the church isolates itself so much in the church building that they forget what is real on the outside. And yes, this is deals with some difficult issues, but we need to. I think Jesus always did.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. Now, you've dealt with a lot of medical issues and you've overcome a lot in your life.
Yeah.
Now, how has that journey influenced the theme and the messages in your writing?
That was the hardest question to answer. I even asked my wife about that one. I said, I don't know. I guess it's given me more of an immediacy that life is fleeting. So you never know. When the first time I heard that word cancer, I just don't. I'm like, I said, I'm dead. And then you make it through that one, and then you think you've beaten that battle, and 3 years later you hear that word again. And so, uh, but to for me, when I came through that, my vow was that I would find what is my mission. Since I'm no longer a pastor, I'm a retired pastor, retired teacher, and so this writing is kind of my missionary field.
Yes.
So that's where I'm doing is creating characters that are pieced through people I've seen and heard and experienced, and dealing with their struggles, addressing those struggles in a realistic way, but also in a hopeful and spiritual way.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Ah,
as there's three basic threads, and they really fall in Abby's past, present, and future. And so
okay.
you have three twines that intervene. So the past that keeps surfacing is the secret that she really hasn't owned up to, that she's trying to, even by changing her name, trying to just say that never happened.
Mhm.
So that piece of her life, the present is actually the mystery and dealing with the reality of what's going on. And the future is the uh, Christian people that are authentic, that go against what she's grown up with, and her father that she's basing everything against. And so those three threads go together, and it's, can she embrace the past, live in the present, and hope for the future?
Now, so we realize like right away that she's hiding something. Just from reading the cover copy,
Mhm.
you know that she's got a big secret.
Yeah.
Um, how long till we find out what the secret is and how deep that internal struggle is? Or is it just build with each book?
Yeah. you find out right away because when she's entering the crime scene, she
Yes.
can't step foot in the sanctuary. She sits there and holds that yellow tape, and she looks at that baptistry, and she looks, across the sanctuary at the cross, and it's almost like that. If I step in here, lightning's going to strike me.
Mhm.
And so there's that long pause that you get from her voice, and you see her struggle to even get past that physical barrier
Mhm.
for her mental barrier. And then as things come in, she starts off feeling like this is a validation of her beliefs and her thoughts about the church. That
Yes.
someone in here, it's all about me. It's all about that. Here's a pastor, a young pastor who was trying to change things, and yeah, people didn't like that, and so someone killed him. That's her thought. And then as the mystery unfolds, and I don't want to give anything away there, but she begins to identify with one of the victims. That's the trigger for the first truth that you find out about her past. So what separated her from her family. In book two, you will find more about what happened after she was separated from her family, what she went through from the age of 14 to 18. That graduates through, and so you don't really find the whole story until book six.
Wow. That's a long time to wait.
Well, yeah, but each one stands on its own.
It's an
But
investment.
the whole arc is because this is a person who over 18, 23 years
Mhm.
lived in that mindset. You can't, it's not a sitcom where 30 minutes later, everything changes and everyone's
Right.
happy. To be realistic. And that's one of the things that the officers that I met with when I'm part of my research here and did the ride along,
Yeah.
he said, please be realistic about this. These murders aren't solved in 2 minutes, 2 days, and everyone goes on their own happy way. He says, make it where it's real. And he says, one of the things I really want you to do, this is Lieutenant um, Daniels, he said, is to deal with the psychological factor of the detectives and of the officers because their personal lives, they sacrifice so much and they deal with this. And so I included what he had asked is a counselor for the police department that two of the characters go to. And so you
Yeah.
see what they deal with on an emotional level from there. And I hadn't planned to do that. That's just something that he asked me to do. And I started looking into it. And here comes my counseling background. So,
That's actually interesting that you mentioned that because we had an author on the program a couple weeks ago who is a counselor for the police departments. And
oh,
so,
wow.
yeah. um, so those books kind of mesh in that way because she's writing from that perspective.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, so you mentioned doing a ride along. What other kind of research did you get to do as a part of this?
Well, I was really, really blessed. I tried to go through several avenues and got turned down, and then I came in contact with Lieutenant Matthew Sears,
Mhm.
and he just kind of took the ball and took it off with it. He got it worked out where I could do a ride along. He hooked me up with a forensic psychologist that worked for Metro Nashville Police Department. And
Yeah.
so right off the bat, I found out that my opening scene, which I had him floating in the battery, was not realistic. And so she said the body would not float until such and such a time. And so she just heard how it broke down and what the process was. And she was just so wonderful. And everybody was so giving and open with their information. Then they hooked me up with a homicide officer, and I talked with him about their process. And he says it's not like TV. Most of the time, we just we sit over lunch and we talk about what we've all learned from interviewing people and screen through what we think is true and what's not true. And it's not as as glamorous as CSIs and all of those.
Mhm. I can imagine that that's one of the hardest parts of being an investigator is determining who's lying and what
Yeah.
they're lying about, because there's always some truth in there. It's just
Yeah.
trying to
And
ferret out what that piece is.
the other thing was they tell me how long it takes to get fingerprints back, to get DNA back, to get it's not like they have this little private, like NCIS. They go down to Abbey and Abbey immediately solves their.
Yes.
He said it's not like that. He says
15 minutes.
your prints are one of 10,000 that are going through that system. It's technology's advancing that, and over the 6 books, you'll see that advancement as well. but it's the backlogs on everything. And so what they have to do in the meantime and how long that really does take.
Do you have more training in the works for you as
I hope
Abby
so.
grows
I
and
hope so.
learns?
Uh, yes, yes. I'm trying for another ride along, but I'm trying to get where I can visit the uh, the morgue and visit that. But that's been hard to be able to get in there because the dead bodies, and you have to get with the personnel, you have to get the family's permission and all of that. But that's one thing I would love to do is watch that process of it. Is
Right.
when they get a body in, what do they really do?
Wow. That it's an amazing thought to walk through that from that perspective,
Mm.
and the non-fictionalized part of it to
Right, right,
see.
and to be as accurate as possible, but it's still fiction.
Yes, keep it exciting, but be realistic.
Right.
So, what do you hope that readers will take from Watergrave, that the primary from this particular book, and not necessarily the whole series, but just Watergrave?
Um, from Watergrave, I hope that they get attached to and get invested in Abby, because if they don't, then there's really no book two for for those readers.
Yeah,
But that they will find um, that they can identify with several of the characters, and they can see as the dynamics work with that, Abby and Susan Ripley and Sam, who's Abby's partner, that you see those characters and they develop slowly, and so you want to see more. It's one of those things where you watch a movie or a TV series and you don't want it to end. You want to see the
hmm,
next one because you like my wife calls it. She goes, "I want to be in their world." That's what I hope they'll get to. Um, and really, as that target audience, that as Abby discovers that not everybody is like her father, that
yes.
there are genuine and authentic people, there are people who demonstrate the love of Christ, that they'll start to see that and the walls will come down brick by brick. And so in Watergrave, obviously you understand the symbolic of Watergrave, that they'll see that this pastor really did die in a way that's going to keep going on and testifying his life.
So, and why don't you explain to people the symbolism of
Okay.
Watergrave? So,
Especially in a Protestant, which I
mhm,
am, it symbolizes as you go under the water, the death of your old self, as you've surrendered to Christ and you've accepted him and said that I'm a sinner. And as you come up out of the water, that newness, that new life in him, that
right.
his spirit dwells in you. And so who I was is gone, and who I am is new and um, has hope, has future. And I'm not anchored to that past. Yes, I have to learn from it. Yes, I have to own it, but it doesn't own me.
Yeah. And
And
that
that's
works
where
in so
that
many
that's
ways.
where that tagline comes in: own the truth, or it will own you.
Mhm. Yeah. So, in your previous book, which we got to read,
Uh-huh.
you had some scenes that were a bit more,
Graphic and yes, difficult.
yeah. And so, does Watergrave include that, or will Abbey Rhodes include that?
No, it doesn't. You'll hear references to it. They'll be
Mhm.
discussing it, but you will not see any of those live, especially
Just a
because
little
in this
more
this
PG,
sense,
more PG.
yeah, more PG.
Hmm.
Not PG-13, but you'll have the discussion. You'll have a discussion of rape. You'll have a discussion of abortion. You'll have a discussion of those kinds of things. But you don't see those. You will see in this one the the death in the opening scene. It's in the first chapter,
Right.
and so that's probably the most violent thing you see, and everything else is trying to deduce how that happened and who had the motive to do that.
Okay. Yeah. So I know we have different readers,
Yeah.
and some
Well,
like,
scales of justice. Your primary character was an assassin, so
yes,
that kind
it
of
made
put
it
me
a
in a
little
whole
different.
that put me in a whole different world. Yeah,
So, can you tell us a little bit about the other things you've written?
sure. I wrote a 4-book young young adult fantasy series called is
Yes.
The Canaan Shade Journeys. And of course, Canaan Shade, you get Canaan is the promised land, so the land of milk and honey. Shade is it's not what it's meant to be or what you thought it was. And so they get into the gaming world, Dungeons and Dragons type thing. I call it Warriors and Thieves because Dungeons and Dragons deny me the right to use their name. So it's pretty much the same thing. Everyone who's read it understands it's the same kind of gaming and they identify with that. But it's a difference when it's on paper than when it's on you. And so what they thought is that this character, if I could only be this character, I'd have a great life. And what they realized at the end is that the life they have is pretty great of who they are. And so it's also a reconciliation piece. And it was based on kind of a true experience I had with gaming. And, one person whose character died took that out on the rest of us because he felt like we had killed him rather than just his character. So that starts with the pack, and then it goes to Dragon's Pond, Treasure of Loak Suel, and Canyon Shade Resurrection. Then obviously I wrote the one-act play, short stories, two or three of those published, I think three. One got published twice, so sometimes I say four, and then I'm taking off on this series, and then I hope to, once I get this series going, to write a middle grade fiction called Tracy Twins Mysteries. And
Yeah.
so it's twins where the girl she came out first and she was, more athletic. She's larger than he is. He's kind of that frail but brilliant, almost autistic mind. And so they have such a tension between the two of them, but together they make a great detective team. And so they solve these little mysteries as they go.
Oh, that
And of
sounds
course,
like so
with
much fun.
Tracy, I tease in that they're kind of descendants of Dick Tracy.
Oh, that's really neat. So, middle grade, so like sixth grade
Yeah,
ish.
four through six.
Wow. Yeah, get writing on those.
Well, it's kind of hit the iron while the iron's hot. Is what I'm doing with these right now, and hopefully building an audience where I can do that and it's branch off to another.
Oh, that's really exciting. Well, thank you for joining us today, Mike.
Okay, thank you.
I
This is
appreciate it.
this is the part that I never dreamed I'd have to do with as an author. You just kind of think you write it and there you go, a million copies and but the promotion, it's hard because being an introvert, it's hard to
Yes,
self promote and to talk about things that you've written. But I just realized that's what you have to do.
you do. Absolutely.
So you make it easy. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And for everybody, check out Watergrave by Mitchell S. Karnes. This is definitely needs to be on your to be read list. Goodness
Yes.
gracious.
It releases January 29th
Just 1 week.
in ebook, paperback, and hardback.
Great. And Amazon and where else?
Everywhere you can get Ingram books. So
Perfect.
Barnes and Noble, Amazon, and it's in 5 different ebook formats. So
That's exciting. Cool. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We will see you again soon.
okay, thank you.